If Casey Anthony and Jodi Arias had a baby, a really manipulative, entitled, compulsive liar baby, it would be Dalia Dippolito. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for being here. Today, we're talking about a woman named Dalia Dippolito. A woman who, it's almost unbelievable the kinds of things she did, the kinds of lengths she went to in order to get what she ultimately thought she wanted. And it's a crazy story. Dalia was arrested in August of 2009 for attempting to hire someone to kill her husband. But there's so much more to the story, to this woman, than meets the eye. She was so manipulative, so evil, so depraved. At times, going through this case, it was hard to believe, and I had to fact check over and over again to make sure that the things I was reading about and hearing were true. So let's start at the beginning, because as you know, in order to understand what happened at the end, we have to go back to the beginning. Before we jump in, let's have a quick word from our sponsor, and today our sponsor is Audible. Audible is an application on your smartphone or your tablet or what have you, and it allows you to get audiobooks and then listen to them. And I know we're all busy, right? We're on the go. We're really ever rarely sitting down and able to read a book. I know that I have a book, a physical book, that I think I'm on chapter 2, and I've had it for 3 months, and I've been trying to get through it so badly because it's so good, but I just don't have the time to sit down and read. So Audible is great for people like me, people like a lot of you, I'm sure. With your Audible subscription, you'll get 1 credit every month, which is good for any title in their collection, regardless of price or length. You'll also get 2 Audible originals every month. You can take your pick from a fresh monthly selection. There's guided wellness programs, meditation and fitness classes for a healthier body and mind. And you'll also get news, stories from the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and Washington Post. You can build your library up. All titles in your library are yours to keep. And the awesome thing about Audible is you can take a risk. You can grab a book you're not sure if you'll like, and if you don't like it, they'll simply swap it out for another one, no questions asked. You also hold on to your monthly credits for up to a year, so there's no pressure to use them right away, and you don't feel that credits are wasted. Audible is such a great service. I think it's so worth it. I always buy books with my credits that are like $27 to $35, so it's well worth it to me. And at this point, I have 2 credits saved up, but I do have a recommendation if you're interested in this video. I've been listening to the book Poison Candy, The Murderous Madam, Inside Dalia Dippolito's Plot to Kill. And this book was written by Elizabeth Parker, who was the attorney for the state of Florida when Dalia would go to court later. So I knew a lot of what was in this book, but it was so interesting getting it from the perspective of the attorney. It was a completely different perspective than I had read before. So it's very interesting, and if you're interested in this case and you want to know more, I highly suggest it. So give Audible a try. Click the link in the description box, and you can get a free month. So you get a free book from Audible. You can cancel anytime. You're not contracted into anything. All right, let's get started on the video. Thank you guys so much for listening to the sponsor. As you know, supporting the sponsors of this channel support this channel. And I love you guys. Let's get started. I have a feeling this is going to be a long one, so grab a coffee, grab a snack, settle in. It's going to be one wild ride. I'll wait. Pause me. I can't wait that long. Okay, Dalia was born on October 18th, 1982. She was born Dalia Muhammad to an Egyptian father and a Peruvian mother. Her childhood seemed fairly normal. There was no glaring warning signs to suggest she would become what she became. Originally, the family lived in New York, but they moved to Boynton Beach in Florida when Dalia was 13, where her family lived in a nice gated community. She was the oldest of 3 children. Her mother worked for a health insurance company, and her father served tables, and Dalia went to a Catholic school. When Dalia was 17, a few things happened. So it seemed like her father had been having an affair. Her mother found out about it and filed for divorce. But when Dalia found out that her parents were separating, it apparently upset her a lot. She ran away. She flew from Miami to New York City, where she was grabbed up by law enforcement at JFK and sent right back home. So this was when she was about 17. It seems she started her career as an escort when she was about 19. So Dalia was a beautiful woman. I mean, she still is, right? She's not dead. Spoiler alert, she's not dead. She's still here, but she's a beautiful woman. But when she was actively, being an escort, obviously she took a lot of care of her appearance. She was petite, short, with long dark hair, golden skin, bright green eyes. She cared a great deal about her physical appearance. It was her job to stay looking good. So she spent hours at the gym and she made sure her hair and her nails were always looking fresh. She met a man named Mike Stanley at a place called the Blue Martini in West Palm Beach. Mike Stanley was a building contractor who was originally from Connecticut, but he was in Florida for the weekend for business. Now, he dealt mainly with high-end interiors for malls and retail spaces, so he was in the area looking to expand his business. And when he met Dalia, she was with her mother and her aunt at the Blue Martini, and he bought them all drinks so he could get to know her better. She was 10 years younger than he was, and he was married with a child. According to him, at this time, he was on the rocks with his wife, a break, if you will, and he was living in the basement of his home in Brookfield, Connecticut. So they kept in touch, and within 6 months, they decided to move to California together. Mike Stanley went to California first to settle in, get a job, get them a place to live, make some business connections, and Dalia followed a month or two later. But their whirlwind romance was not to last. According to him, his job called for him to work often and late. So he had long hours, he was often working. And additionally, their age difference became more evident the more time they spent together. So I've always said it's easy, it's not easy to have a long distance relationship, but it's easy to overlook flaws in your partner when you have a long distance relationship because you're mainly communicating over the phone or the internet. But when you live with this person, you're together with this person every day, their little idiosyncrasies, their flaws, their hang-ups, things that you didn't notice before, you'll become more aware of because you're with this person every day. And they can get on your nerves a lot quicker in person every day than they can, long distance. So that's pretty much what happened with Dalia and Mike Stanley. But for a few months after calling it quits, they lived in the same house, occupying different bedrooms. But then one weekend, Dalia went home to visit her family in Florida. And when she got back, she told Mike she'd met someone else and she'd be leaving California permanently. Okay, so according to court records, Dalia not only worked as an escort, promising the girlfriend experience to her clients, but she ran her own group of girls, setting them up with dates and taking a percentage of their earnings. So essentially she was, a pimp. She was a madam. She ran a massage parlor in Orange County, California, and she placed advertisements for her business on Craigslist and SugarDaddy.com to bring new men, to bring new clientele in. When she left California, she didn't have a lot of loose ends to tie up. The building she ran her business out of, her massage parlor, it was in Mike Stanley's name since she told him she didn't have the credit to do it herself. The house they lived in was in Mike's name, and she knew she could continue to hook her employees up with dates long distance. She didn't have to physically be there. So the girlfriend experience, for those of you who don't know, it's when you hire a girl and you pay them for their companionship. And it could involve sex, but it also involves, cuddling or going out on dates, bringing this woman to business events, having basically somebody there who will be as if they're your girlfriend, but they're not actually your girlfriend. That's what Dalia specialized in. So keep that in mind. Keep in mind that she was essentially a professional girlfriend. She would know exactly what a man would want, and she'd be able to figure out quickly upon meeting a man what kind of girl he was looking for and transform into that. It was her job. Okay, enter Mike Dippolito. Michael Dippolito. The best way I can describe him is Ronnie from the Jersey Shore. Mike was originally from South Philly, and he had a really complicated family dynamic. His parents were both absent drug addicts, and he had some family ties to organized crime, with his relatives Joe and Charlie Dippolito being involved in some gang activity during the 50s and 60s in LA. He was raised by his grandparents. His grandparents have been described as highly functioning alcoholics, and he liked to work on cars, and he had dreams of becoming an auto mechanic, but life had different plans for him. Life had a different path in mind for him. He first started drinking alcohol when he was 10, and he began selling pot when he was in the 9th grade. From there, it was all downhill as he turned his attention to harder drugs. He was a popular drug dealer because he always priced his drugs lower than everybody else, but he wasn't necessarily a very good drug dealer. He'd come up short a few times. one of which was a time he got ripped off by a pretty girl. And when he told the people that he worked for, like the people he was supposed to bring the money to, what had happened, they demanded that he go and like beat up this girl and take the money back or the drugs. But he said he wasn't going to do it. So he himself was battered by 30 thugs, only being saved when a passing friend pulled him out and got him to the hospital. He was also arrested one time when one of his friends pulled a gun on another guy, all of them being in a drug-induced haze, and he went to juvie several times between the ages of 15 and 18. He was sober for several years, but then he discovered Percocet. He sold crack on a street corner in a Dominican neighborhood in Philly, and they called him White Boy Mike. But after he was beaten within an inch of his life, he decided it was time for a change. So he left Philly and moved to Boca Raton, Florida, to stay in a halfway house and get his life together. For a while, he worked normal jobs. He stayed on the straight and narrow, but then he met a girl who was mixed up with ecstasy, and his vicious cycle repeated itself again. He became addicted to the drug, and it began to rule and ruin his life. He had a lot going for him, though. He was a gym rat, so he always maintained his buff shape. Like Mike Dippolito's biceps are huge. That's why he reminds me of Ronnie from the Jersey Shore. But even though he looked like this big tough guy on the outside, he's got like tribal tattoos, huge muscles, he's tan, he's probably got like a mean mug on. Inside, he was a complete teddy bear, whose fondest memories were of dancing with his mother in her room at night before she went out. If he had a weakness or a character flaw, it was that he was a tad naive, and he always saw the best in people. Sometimes this would be his downfall. Mike Dippolito was also a natural-born salesman. He had a way of making people feel at ease, like they were chatting with a friend. He tried selling gold coins for a bit, and he was good at it, but he found the work boring and unrewarding. He ended up joining a Wolf of Wall Street boiler room type operation, making cold calls, convincing people to invest in foreign currency. It was a scam, though. There was no business opportunity there for these people that they were calling. Mike and his coworkers were just taking their money and vanishing. Now, the feds would raid their offices, and then they would just pack up and relocate somewhere else where they would continue their calls. It's a tale as old as time. In 18 months, the operation had brought in somewhere between $13 and $18 million. And out of that, Mike received a few $100,000. But law enforcement was constantly getting involved, like constantly trying to break it up, making them move. So he struck out on his own, but his own business, it didn't last for very long. In 2001, Mike created two companies, MAD Financial and CTU Inc., both of which he was the sole officer and director. From an apartment in Boca Raton, he cold called people all over the country, trying to persuade them once again to invest in foreign currency, in what he called a risk-free investment that would show a big profit, big returns within just a few months. Now, George Nemeth is a man that Mike scammed and stole from. He's one of the victims of this scam, and he claims that he gave Mike $20,000, and Mike was so good at convincing him that this was real, that it was happening. He was already imagining the boat he was going to buy with the profits he was going to be getting in just a few short months. At least a dozen other people also wired Mike's company money, anywhere from $16,000 to $25,000. Like, that's how much they wired to him each. That's not what he made total. That's what they wired to him each. So Mike also had a few weaknesses of his own, right? He loved drugs and he loved call girls, and he threw money at these things with great abandon. What he didn't spend on escorts and ecstasy was frozen by his bank due to suspicious transactions. And when he tried to cash a bad check, he was arrested. And his apprehension was almost a relief to him, right? He'd been running for so long, trying to keep his head above water, spending days locked in hotel rooms with piles of drugs and multiple call girls. It was nice to not have to run and look over his shoulder anymore. So when he went to jail, he had a girlfriend, a nice Italian girl named Maria, and she was ride or die for Mike. She'd known Mike for years. I think 9 years they'd known each other. And she said he'd always been a sweet and thoughtful boyfriend, the kind of person who always put others before himself. She said Mike would never intentionally hurt anybody. And she even said this about him after he did something bad to her. So I think it's true. And she actually sold her car to pay for a lawyer for him and waited while he served 7 months in prison. So he'd been sentenced to 2 years for these scams, but he was given time served, and when he was released, he'd made a deal that he'd plead guilty to organized fraud, unlicensed telemarketing, and grand theft, and in return, he needed to pay full restitution to the victims of his scams to the tune of $219,000, and he'd also be on probation for 28 years. That's a long time to be on probation. When he got out, he was 32 years old. He'd gained a GED and a few pounds while behind bars, but he'd also gained a new perspective on life. And this time he knew there was really no choice but to live a legit life, follow the rules. If he was caught doing something again, that would be a violation of his probation. He'd be right back in that jail, in that cage, and he didn't want that. So if you look at Mike and Dalia, two people that in our story haven't met yet. You've got Dalia, comes from a nice family. Her parents got divorced, but that's pretty common these days. Went to a Catholic school. It seems to have no issues, really no criminal record. And then you've got Mike, who just comes from a family of addicts and alcoholics, develops a drug problem of his own, sells drugs, gets put in juvie, gets put in jail, starts, one of those financial scams. It seems like he'd be the one that would end up being the bad guy in the story. But Dalia is, in fact, the bad guy in the story. So Mike Dippolito and his loyal girlfriend Maria were married after he got out of prison, and he was lucky enough at that point to get into the business of internet marketing before it was really a thing. He started an online marketing company called MAD Media Incorporated, and he was doing well financially. He had the love of a good woman who'd supported him and had his back while he was going through his legal troubles. He was driving a Porsche, but he did have an addictive personality. And since he wasn't able to use drugs, he had to meet his urges elsewhere. In October of 2008, when his wife Maria was out of town for work for a couple of weeks, and Mike was at his office late, a coworker introduced him to a website called eros.com. Now, this obviously wasn't Mike's first encounter with escorts, but he'd put all that behind him long ago with the drugs and the crime. He was working late, though. His wife was out of town for 3 weeks. He was lonely, so he began to browse the website, just curious about, what kind of stuff was on there, before finding a profile that caught his eye. She was a real looker, thin, exotic, and in town only for the weekend. It was perfect, a quick fix that no one ever had to know about, and he could go back to his normal life when it was over, as if it had never happened. He could get it out of his system. The girl said her name was Dalia, and when he called the phone number provided, she picked up on the first ring. She had to call back several times to get directions, to find where he was, but eventually he opened his front door to find the beauty on his screen standing in front of him in the flesh. And Mike said that at first Dalia seemed nervous, as if this wasn't something she did all the time, and that endeared her to him. It brought out his natural protective instincts. They chatted and got to know each other a bit before getting down to business, and when she left, she smiled coyly at him and said she'd be in town for a few more days if he wanted to meet up again. Well, Mike thought to himself, that's never going to happen, right? It was a one-time thing, and now that it was out of his system, he could get back to his happy life. But the next day, he couldn't stop thinking about Dalia. The feel of her skin, the way she smiled at him through her eyelashes, the sound of her laugh. So he called her again, but she told him she was getting her nails done and she couldn't meet that day. However, she showed up the next day to his house without calling. They went into the bedroom, right? They did their thing that she was paid to do. And as she was gathering her things to go, he mentioned the next day he might be at the beach, to which she responded, well then, I might stop by. And after that, the door was open. And not the door to Mike's house, because Dalia did not take the door to Mike's house to leave. The door was open into Mike's life. Dalia didn't leave. She put her things down, led him back into the bedroom. They went at it again, this time on the house. And this should have been Mike Dippolito's first red flag. The first sign that this had quietly changed from a business transaction to something more personal, but he missed it, or he was happy about it, or he just didn't want to see it. I don't know which one it is, but he pushed forward, full steam ahead. The next day, she came back again at 10 a.m. It was a Saturday, and according to Mike, they spent the whole weekend in bed. Dalia gave off the whole not like other girls vibe, right? This is a trope that you often see on the internet. You see in memes where girls are like, other girls wearing dress and heels, me wearing dirty sneakers and sweatpants. I'm not like other girls. It's gotten actually out of control. It kind of drives me crazy, but that's what Dalia wanted people to think she was. At least she wanted men to think she was like that, right? She was laid back. She wasn't clingy or high maintenance. She seemed cool and down to earth. She seemed perfect. What Mike was most intrigued by was that out of the bedroom, she gave off this innocent vibe, but behind closed doors, she was wild. He said that the sex was unlike anything he'd ever experienced, and he thought that they had a real and immediate emotional connection. It wasn't a job to her. She wasn't coming to see him as a client or a John. She genuinely enjoyed spending time with him. They hit it off. They connected on a physical and mental level, or so he thought. In reality, Mike saw what Dalia wanted him to see. A like-minded person, a hard worker, a hustler, not ashamed of her past or what she'd chosen to do on her path to becoming successful. Outside of what she did for a living, she seemed so straight-laced. She lived in the gym like he did. She didn't do drugs. She barely drank alcohol. And according to Mike, Dalia had her own money through her escort work and as a real estate agent, which she apparently was. Okay, she's a real estate agent and a pimp. So he wasn't worried about her being a gold digger. When his wife Maria got back from her business trip, he broke the news to her. Well, he broke part of the news to her. He said he wanted a divorce and he was moving out, but initially he didn't tell her that it was because he'd met someone else. He just was like, I'm leaving and I want a divorce. And of course, poor Maria, she's confused. She's been at his side through everything. She thought they had a happy marriage. They did have a happy marriage. And Maria confronted him later when she saw him in the store buying flowers, and he finally admitted that he was seeing someone else. He told Maria he'd met this woman online and that she lived in a different state, and Maria said she thought it was sketchy and a little weird and suspicious. But Mike did not think it was. And you'll see this pattern. Everybody in Mike's life, once they meet Dalia and realize that Mike's serious about this girl, they all tell him, like, get away. There's something off about her. But he doesn't. Dalia told him she needed to go back to California to set her affairs in order. And when she came back 2 weeks later, he'd moved out of the house he and Maria shared, and he'd rented a house in Boynton Beach, which Dalia moved into with him immediately, right? Their relationship is moving at top speed. Pretty much a month. They meet, decide that this is the real thing for them. Mike moves out of his wife's house, and then they're living together. Dalia introduced him to her mother and siblings that same month, and at the end of October, Mike took Dalia and her whole family out for dinner at a Delray Beach restaurant for Dalia's birthday. But while they were at this restaurant eating, something strange happened. Mike looked up and he saw a man standing behind Dalia's chair, dressed in a suit and holding flowers. Before Mike could ask any questions, Dalia jumped up and brought this stranger outside, and she was back within a few minutes. She explained to Mike that this man was an ex-boyfriend, someone she'd lived with in California, and he was taking their breakup hard. So basically, he was like there to win Dalia back. It was certainly awkward for everyone involved, but Dalia swore she had taken care of it, and it wasn't long before dinner went back to normal and the whole incident was forgotten. In November of 2008, Dalia got breast implants that she was very proud of. Like I said, Dalia was a really petite girl, and she worked out a lot to keep herself fit, but she'd always wished for more curves, and now she had them. And according to Mike, he did not pay for this procedure. Once again, this was another reason for Mike to believe that Dalia had her own money, and money wasn't the motivation for her coming into his life like a sexy tornado. At the end of December, Mike and Dalia left Florida and they flew to Vegas to celebrate the new year. Now, according to Mike, this was where Dalia's facade faltered a bit, and he saw what he thought might be her real personality. So they were going to Vegas to watch a UFC fight at the MGM Grand. Mike had to get permission from his parole officer to leave the state, and this annoyed Dalia slightly. And he was like, it's not a big deal. All I have to do is, have a business meeting while I'm there. That way I can say it's a work trip and that they're not going to stop me from doing that. Like if it has something to do with work, they're not going to stop me. But she was irritated that they couldn't just pick up and go. They couldn't be spontaneous. They had to clear it with a court or somebody else. But once in Vegas, everything was going fine, and they had a great time until the morning after the UFC fight when Mike woke up early to go to the gym, as he did every day. Mike was a creature of habit. He had a very strict routine, and he said that he needed this routine in order to keep him clean and off drugs and alcohol. He needed to have structure and order in his life. And as you'll see, I don't know how this guy stays sober, or even if he did, I don't know. But I don't know how he does once Dalia comes into his life, because any structure, routine, or peace of mind that this man had would be just destroyed when she showed up. Okay, so the morning after the UFC fight, right, Mike gets up really early to go to the gym, like he usually does. And when he got back to the room, he found his girlfriend pouty and upset because he'd gone without her. So now they have their first fight, right? Everybody knows the first fight in a relationship. It's one really that will set the stage for your fights for the rest of your relationship. And her petulant behavior ruined the rest of the trip, at least for Mike. And for the first time, Mike considered maybe they'd moved a little too quickly. Maybe he really didn't know this woman, and it was best if he ended it before things did get too serious. When they got back to Florida, he told her it was over. And according to Mike, Dalia was stunned. She didn't ask him to reconsider. She didn't try to figure out what she'd done to cause him to feel this way. She just sat there as if she didn't understand what was happening before saying, "I've never been broken up with before." To which he answered, "Yeah, well, there's a first time for everything." Kind of a dick answer, but I mean, come on. Who says that? I've never been broken up with before. Such a big ego. So once she realized he wasn't going to change his mind, she demanded $2,500 for moving expenses. And he said he paid it just to get rid of her. But in my opinion, this should have been another red flag for Mike. If she was financially independent, if she had her own money, why would she need him to pay her to move? Yes, Mike. Go off, king. Dodged a bullet, right? Wrong. In mid-January, after they'd been apart for a few weeks, they met for coffee to survey the ruins of their relationship. Now, this is always a trap, by the way. Relationship advice for you guys if you don't know. The meeting is set under the guise of getting closure, figuring out what went wrong, using that knowledge to move on emotionally and be more successful in future relationships. But for Dalia, it was the opportunity to get him in person and worm her way back into his heart and his life. She was the kind of girl who'd always gotten what she wanted, using whatever she had at her disposal to manipulate dozens of men throughout her life. And when he met her that day at the coffee shop, she wasn't the outraged, self-assured woman who looked at him with fire in her eyes when he broke up with her and said, "You've never broken up with me before." Pretty much saying, "What are you, an idiot? I've never been broken up with before. You're the first. That means you're dumb." That's what I heard. She was humble, apologetic, eyes downturned. She told him she missed him, and if he was honest with himself, he missed her too, especially the intimacy they had shared. For some reason, I can't say why, and I'm not sure Mike could ever say why either. Instead of moving back into a relationship with her slowly, he just suggested then and there that they get married. Now, he claims that this wasn't planned. He didn't even have a ring. It just occurred to him, and the question popped out, and of course, Dalia happily said yes. Of all the things in this case that I don't understand, this is probably one of the top ones, like top 3. Why did he ask her to marry him? The only thing that I can assume is that Dalia is a manipulative person, right? She has perfected the art of manipulation. She's perfected the art of making someone else, a man in this case, feel so good about himself that just her presence, seeing her, being around her, makes him feel better, makes him feel like a better version of himself. So he would want to keep her around for as long as possible. Also, the sex, I'm sure that had something to do with it, Can't imagine that Dalia showed up to that coffee shop in sweatpants, looking sad like she's been crying for days. She probably came looking amazing. That's what you do when you see your ex for the first time after you break up. You're not trying to look like a homeless person. You want to look hot. And I'm sure she's perfected the art of looking hot. Okay, so now Mike and Dalia are engaged, but they can't get married yet, right? Because he's still married to Maria. But on January 28th, 2009, his divorce from his wife Maria was finalized. And the next day, he closed on a townhouse, a $238,000 townhouse paid all in cash. And of course, Dalia was the real estate agent for the deal, so she collected the commission. Now, like I said, this townhouse was paid for all in cash, something he'd done the previous year when he'd bought his mother a house. And Dalia's mother and her siblings lived less than a mile away, so this is a perfect situation, right? Dalia decorated the townhouse using Mike's money in tasteful muted grays and tans. She had all brushed aluminum appliances installed, black lacquer furniture, big screen televisions. The bed was covered with a lush fake fur bedspread, and she bought a Nordic check to keep up with her figure. The couple also had 2 pets, a fluffy white Maltese named Bella, who belonged to Dalia, and Mike's dog, an English bulldog named Linguini. Adorable. On February 2nd, they were at the courthouse and married, less than a week after his divorce with Maria had gone through. And if you ask Mike, the honeymoon never ended. He thought they had the most perfect marriage. He thought he was a great husband and that she was an adoring wife. Dalia seemed to anticipate his needs. That's what he said. She knew what he liked. She'd surprise him with small treats. She'd buy him gifts. They wrote each other sweet notes. In one Valentine's Day card, Dalia writes, "Since I met you, I never hesitated and never had any doubts. You are such an amazing husband. With you, everything has always fit right." There was a dry erase board on the refrigerator that they would take turns writing loving messages to each other or leaving silly drawings for the other person to find. Not only that, but Dalia was fun. She was fun. They had fun together. And the sex was still phenomenal, even after marriage. People say that sex gets worse after marriage, right? But Mike would find that wasn't true. Mike said that Dalia was very experienced in the bedroom, right? And she would want him to do things that even he felt reserved about. Now, he claims that Dalia always wanted to get close to him, day or night, all day, all night, right? And she'd often request that he'd choke or hit her during sex. Now, Mike claims he wasn't really into this, but he insisted that she would demand he do it and do it harder. He said, quote, "I could have gone 10 times further. She loved it." So basically, Dalia wanted it rough in the bedroom, and Mike wasn't that into it, into it to a certain amount, but to the point where she wanted it, he was afraid to hurt her. The only thing that seemed to bother Dalia was her new husband's probation. They couldn't spontaneously travel. They had to hide their money so it wouldn't be seized to pay off the restitution. Mike had been making a dent in his debt, getting it down from $219,000 to $191,000, but it was depressing to think that he might be paying this off for years, forever, like a weight around his neck, which is exactly how I feel about my student loans. They are drowning me. Dalia, being the lovely and supportive wife that she was, made Mike a deal. She would put up $91,000 towards his restitution, and he would only have to come up with the other $100K. But if they could pull this off, it would mean that he'd be done with the probation, with the restitution. It would be behind him. Mike was blown away and beyond grateful for her offer. They had decided initially to keep their money separate so that she wouldn't be affected by his debts, but the fact that she would do this for him reinforced his belief that she was truly in love with him. He'd come from such a tumultuous, uncertain childhood. He'd never really had anyone, that he could depend on. But here was someone who wasn't judging him for his past mistakes, who was willing to take a big financial risk to change his life. The realization that he didn't have to be alone, that he could have a true partner in life, it touched his heart beyond words. So Mike had the money, right? He'd managed to stash away about $250,000, all in cash, in a safety deposit box. Dalia proposed this plan to him so that the authorities wouldn't catch on to what they were doing and how much money Mike had actually hidden away. He would take the cash out of the safety deposit box and he would make them into cashier checks, several cashier checks that he would write to Dalia with small amounts over the course of, a few weeks. So they'd all be amounts that were under 10 grand, and he'd give them to her slowly. And over the next couple of weeks, he ended up giving her $87,000 in cashier checks and $13,000 in cash. She told him she was going to deposit the checks and the money into her bank, add in her part of the restitution, and then arrange for a wire transfer to his lawyer so that his lawyer could pay the restitution and he'd be off probation and free to live his life however he wanted. And this sounds like a great plan, right? Only one problem. Mike's lawyer never got the money. A wire transfer should have been real quick, a couple of days, tops. And Mike Dippolito would have known this, considering he ran an illegal scamming business where people had to wire him money all the time. Mike Dippolito would have known how long a wire transfer would take. I mean, sometimes it's immediate, sometimes it just takes a day or so, but it never takes much longer than that. Every time Mike called his lawyer to see if the money had gotten there yet, the lawyer said, "No, there's no money here." And Dalia always had an excuse for why the wire transfer hadn't gone through yet. At first, she said she'd wired it through an account in the Grand Cayman Islands to save on the transfer fees, and then she said it had been reversed and she'd had to put it through again. And at one point, she even suggested that Mike's lawyer might have gotten the money but stolen it. She made a big show of calling his lawyer's office every morning to see if the money had gotten there yet, always slamming down the phone in frustration when she was told that it hadn't. Now, Mike loved his wife, right? He wanted to believe she was telling the truth, but we've got almost $200,000 missing, and it wasn't really something he could look the other way on. He was within an arm's reach of being done with probation, and he couldn't risk having something go wrong. He was generous, though, and he gave her 3 weeks to figure it out. So on March 12th, Mike and Dalia receive a surprise visit from Mike's probation officer at midnight. And with the probation officer, there was a few Boynton Beach police officers. Now, the probation officer apologized, but he said they'd received an anonymous tip that Mike was selling steroids and ecstasy, and they had to search his home. Mike was obviously shocked and confused. He'd been on probation for over 6 years, and this had never happened to him. And even though the search turned up nothing, Mike's probation officer began making more surprise visits and giving Mike more attention, which is never something you really want when you're on probation. You kind of want the probation officer to leave you alone. The less you see the probation officer, the better you're doing. Dalia, once again, being the best wife ever and realizing her husband was upset, she suggested that they get away for the weekend. And so she booked a room at the Ritz-Carlton in Manalapan in Palm Beach. Now, this hotel is closed now, but in its prime, it was a really high-end place. The rooms would run you $1,200 a night, and Dalia paid for this with her own money to treat him and to get his mind off all of his troubles. They checked in on March 14th, which was a Saturday, and they had a great night. But on Sunday morning, Mike woke up early to go to the gym, and when he was on his way back to the room, he saw some police officers in the lobby, which perplexed him because it was still really early. Like, he gets up really early to work out, 4:30 or 5. So when he was in the lobby, it was probably around 6:30 or so. You know, it's pretty early. And they were just standing around in the lobby like they were waiting for something. They weren't talking to anybody. They weren't looking at anything. They were just standing there. So he went up to the room where Dalia was. They packed up their things and they went back down to the lobby to check out and have the car pulled up through valet. The cops were still there, and when Mike took the keys from the valet, one of them approached, and they were like, "Is this your vehicle?" And Mike said yes, fully aware that the scene was being watched by everyone in the hotel lobby. The cops apologized, but they said they'd like to search his vehicle since they'd gotten reports it was involved with illegal drug activity. He gave them the keys, and then he and Dalia stood and watched along with everyone else in the lobby. Well, the cops searched Mike's SUV, but found nothing, right? So they found nothing. Still, this is like a high-end hotel. It's the Ritz-Carlton, $1,200 a night, all these rich people standing around watching your car get searched by the cops. He was incredibly embarrassed and completely confused about why this was happening. Why now? On the way home, Mike drove, and Dalia made a big show of calling his lawyer to tell him about the incident. And after she got off the phone, the both of them sat there and kind of like speculated on why this was happening, who was doing this to him, who's trying to set him up. They were both equally stunned by this new turn of events. So the next day, which was Monday, March 16th, Mike had to get to his AA meeting early because it was his turn to make coffee. So if you've ever been to AA or NA or something like that, there's somebody who's tasked with doing certain things. Like one person has to come in early, make the coffee, set the chairs up. That was Mike's job that day. And on the way, he stopped at a gas station to fill up. And when he opened his gas tank, he found a bag of pills and powder stuffed in there, right? In his gas tank. He panicked. He knew it wasn't his. He knew it hadn't been in there the previous day when the police had searched his car. Or had it been? Had it been in there, in his gas tank, and they just hadn't found it? And he realized that. He realized that it was a good possibility these things had been in his car when the police had searched his car. And if they'd found it, he would have been back in cuffs, no questions asked. Not knowing what to think, what to do, he threw the baggie out and he got out of there. He started to really wonder if someone was trying to set him up. Bless his dear, pure little innocent heart. And it would only get worse for Mike. His lawyer finally called him and he was like, "Dude, the money's not here. And I have a sneaking suspicion it's never going to be." He told Mike, "You need to talk to your wife because something's not right." And Mike finally did confront Dalia and he demanded to know where all the money was. He said he was going to leave. He said, if I can't trust you, I can't be with you. And I'm sure you're lying about something. Dalia finally came clean, alleging that she'd lost the money after trying to make a profit and falling victim to a scam. Now, I have my own opinions about why Dalia pretended to have lost the money in some scam, because this was a lie, okay? I think, knowing about Mike's past, she knew he'd be all too familiar with how easily people can fall for schemes like this. He had been the one who had victimized many people himself this way, and possibly he'd feel sympathy for her for being tricked like that. Either way, she said she would pay back the money as soon as she could. She was just waiting for some commissions to clear from houses she'd sold. Okay. Now, you would think that Mike would feel angry, betrayed even, but definitely angry, right? She'd lost almost $200,000, money that was supposed to be his ticket to freedom, change his life. But he wasn't mad. He didn't yell at her or kick her out. He was proud of her for being so brave and coming clean, finally telling the truth. He admired her ability to own up to what she had done, which is so ironic. On March 29th, Mike and Dalia had dinner in West Palm Beach, and Mike noticed a guy sitting at the bar who kept looking at him. He mentioned it to Dalia, but she just kind of shrugged it off. And after they ate, they walked to the parking garage where their car was, only to find a handful of cops standing around the SUV. When they approached, the cops asked once again to search his vehicle. And at this point, Mike thinks it's like almost comical. You know, he's looking around. Where's the hidden cameras? Like, when is Ashton Kutcher going to pop out and tell me I've been punked? He tells the police, yeah, you can search the car, but he lets them know that this has been happening to him quite a lot, and he explains about the past couple situations. The cops are like, okay, dude, yeah, everybody's got an excuse, right? So they search his car anyways, and this was a much more thorough search, and it took longer as Dalia impatiently stood by, seeming annoyed by the interference to her evening. They searched the car for about 15 minutes, but they couldn't find anything, so they brought in a German Shepherd, a police dog, to sniff around the car, see if he could find anything. Okay, so this police dog quickly alerts to the back of the SUV, specifically right around the area of the spare tire. Now, when the police were like, okay, the dog's sniffing here, what's going on with the spare tire? They're always going to give you a chance to, like, come clean. Mike told the police he'd never removed the spare tire. He didn't even know how. Inside, they found a cigarette pack containing 1.5 grams of coke, but Mike's reaction was generally so surprised and shocked. When they uncovered it, even the police noticed, and they were like, wow, this guy seems really surprised that this is here. One police officer, a female cop, pulled Mike aside, and he begged with her to believe him. He was 6 years sober, they could give him a drug test to prove it, and then he began to cry, and she felt really bad for him. So she told him confidentially that they'd received an anonymous phone call telling them that they'd find 1 gram of coke in his car. But it wasn't even close to that much what they found. The amount he had wouldn't be enough to sell, and if he was just keeping it for personal use, why would he have stashed it away in such an inconvenient, hard-to-reach place? So the police ended up believing Mike, and they let him go, but Mike began saving copies of the police reports from all these incidents in his glove compartment, anticipating that this would not be the last time something like this would happen to him, and he'd need proof to show that he was clearly being targeted. And suddenly, it was as if a light turned on in Mike's head. Over 6 years sober, 6 years on probation with no issues, and all of a sudden, these horrible things are happening to him. What was different in his life recently that could be the common denominator for all of this? Well, his new wife, Dalia. So they're driving home afterwards, after the dog finds the drugs in the spare tire, and Mike asked Dalia, who was in the driver's seat this time, if the drugs were hers, if she'd put them there. In response to this perfectly reasonable question, she pushes her foot down on the gas pedal, like as far as it can go. Pedal to the metal, right? Getting Mike's car to over 100 miles per hour on the highway. This poor guy, he sees his life flashing before his eyes. He's begging with her to slow down. He's like, I didn't mean it. I was just asking. I don't know what else to think anymore. He's panicking. I don't believe you're responsible. I just don't know what else to do. Trying to calm her down. And eventually she does slow down, but he's terrified at this point. The next day, Dalia handed him a cashier's check for $191,000. And Mike's like, oh, finally, and at first he's relieved, but then he sees that the name on the check wasn't Dalia's. It wasn't from Dalia. It was the name Eric Tall. And Mike was like, who the hell is Eric Tall? According to Dalia, Eric Tall was the husband of a coworker of hers, a woman named Carrion. Now, she said this was the only way she could get the money to Mike, by reversing the wire transfer to a third party. Now, none of this made any sense, Mike was so happy to just have the money, or what he thought was the money, in his hands, he didn't really push it. And they would go the next day to his lawyer's office in Fort Lauderdale, hand the check over, and this nightmare would be over. They get to the lawyer's office, sit down at his desk, and then Dalia, freaks out. She's got the check in his hand. She's about to hand it to the lawyer. Mike sees the end is near, and she just starts crying and sobbing. She explained to these two shocked men staring at her that she didn't know now if giving Mike the money was the right thing to do, since he'd questioned her trustworthiness. She felt she was no longer interested in investing in someone who didn't believe in her. She told Mike simply that she would hand him the check once he gave her the $91,000 that she'd put in. So she's basically saying, I have all the money here, but I've given you $91,000 and I want that back before I give you this money. She's saying that to her husband, right? Which is pretty shitty. So Mike pleaded with her, right? Pleaded with his lawyer. He's telling Dalia, we'll figure this out later. Just give him the check. I'll promise I'll give you the money later. And she's like, nope, I want it right now. And the lawyer was like, well, I can't really take it from her. I can't grab it from her fingers if she doesn't want to willingly give it to me. So frustrated, at the end of his rope, Mike left Dalia at the lawyer's office, drove all the way to Boca Raton where his safety deposit box was. He took $91,000 in cash out, put it into a shopping bag, and then drove back to Fort Lauderdale to the lawyer's office to give this bag of money to Dalia. When she had the cash in hand, she gave him the check, and he handed the check over to his lawyer's secretary. But when he came back from giving the check to the secretary, Dalia was gone. She wasn't in the waiting area where she'd been previously. She'd just up and vanished. And while he's standing there, where did my wife go? His lawyer comes running out of his office, waving this check and yelling and telling Mike, stop, wait, and he hands Mike the check. And the check that Mike had held in his hand just hours before, it no longer said $191,000, it said $191. So Mike's staring at this check, open-mouthed, and his lawyer told him, I warned you about her. I knew she was trouble, I tried to tell you. Mike couldn't address his bad relationship choices at that time. He needed to find Dalia, so he calls her, and he's like, where are you? And she says, I'm by the car, I'm waiting by the car. So he runs down to the car to try to get an explanation of what the heck's going on. When he gets to the car, she's standing there with two other people, a man and a woman, supposedly Eric Tall and his wife Carrie-Ann. And Mike ignored these two people and he turned on Dalia, and he immediately demands that she gives him the cash back, right? The bag of cash he'd just given to her. She did, but then he told her to get in the car. They were going home. In the car, Mike demanded to know how she had switched the checks. And she played dumb. She said, it hadn't been her. It must have been Eric. It must have been Eric, right? It couldn't be anybody else. So she blames this Eric Tall guy. The minute they get home, Mike had Dalia call Eric Tall, and then he took the phone from her. So this man, Eric, who Mike said had some sort of thick accent, this man, Eric, told Mike that he'd told Dalia to be upfront with Mike about what was going on. And Mike's like, well, what is going on? So Eric said the real story was that Dalia had lost the money in a scam, like she'd originally claimed, but she was scared that Mike would leave her if she didn't get the money back soon. So she'd called Carrie-Ann, and she'd had Carrie-Ann convince her husband Eric to loan the money to Dalia to be paid back when those commissions went through, right? Dalia's going to pay Eric back when her commissions on her houses that she's selling goes through. So Eric said, I'm still willing to help, but since you and your wife have caused me so much trouble, I've been driving all over the place, he wanted something in return. He asked for 10 points on the whole $191,000, which would be $19,000. So the next day is April 1st, April Fool's Day, ironically enough, and Mike met Eric at Eric's bank, and he gave him the $91,000 in cash that he'd just taken from his safety deposit the day before, plus an additional $50,000 in cash and cashier checks. Now the deal was Eric would put up the additional $50K that was needed to complete the restitution. Eric had his bank make out a cashier check to Mike's lawyer for the whole amount, $191,000, and Mike's basically giving Eric all this money, but Eric's only going to be putting in $50,000, okay? And then Mike and Dalia went back to the lawyer's office to hand the check over, but when they got there, his lawyer asked Dalia to leave his office so he could talk to his client, Mike, in private. So the lawyer had gotten some documents, and these documents had been faxed over from Eric Tall, and they stated that in return For the $50,000 loan, Mike would have to put up his house as collateral. And Mike's lawyer's like, this is getting kind of sketchy here, man. I don't specialize in property law. The whole situation just seems off. And he basically told Mike to find a new lawyer. Like, I'm glad to have been able to help you this long, but on this journey you're going on, you're going to need somebody else. He gave him the name of a lawyer who could help with like property law and stuff like that. But he also handed him back the check and said he couldn't take it. He couldn't deal with the situation. So therefore, he wasn't going to help Mike out with the restitution now. His new lawyer would do that. So let's take a quick inventory of how much money Mike is in the hole for at this point. I only wish that Mike had taken such an inventory when this happened. So the $100,000 that he'd initially given to Dalia, that she'd allegedly lost in the scam, the $90,000 that he'd taken from his safety deposit box that had ended up with Eric Tall, the $50,000 he'd given to Eric for the loan, plus attorney's fees. He'd lost about $240,000, and he had literally nothing to show for it. He's desperate at this point, so he calls the lawyer that his old lawyer suggested. He hires her over the phone, sight unseen. He drove to her office to give her the check, but she told him, what am I supposed to do with this check? The check's made out to somebody else, your old lawyer. And the old lawyer had washed his hands of the whole sketchy situation, so I obviously can't take this check from you. Mike called Eric, and he asked him to make out a new check with the correct new lawyer's name, and Eric was like, yeah, no problem, just meet me at the bank. Meet me at the bank tomorrow, okay? So the next day came, and do you think it went smoothly for Mike? Do you think it went smoothly for poor, sweet Mike? No, not from the very first moment. He woke up on April 2nd and he took the dogs for a walk at about 7:45 a.m. as he usually did. But when he got back to his townhouse, the cops were waiting. Again, they already had Dalia, and they told him they'd received complaints of shouting and loud noises coming from his home. And Mike admitted, like, he and Dalia may have been fighting and arguing about the money situation. So the police separated Mike and Dalia to question them away from each other. And the officer he was with told Mike that an anonymous caller, once again, an anonymous caller had claimed they'd seen someone who they referred to as a drug dealer in Mike's townhouse, grab a woman and drag her inside by her hair, and they were afraid for this woman's life. Now, Dalia denied to her police officer she was talking to, that anything had happened, or that Mike had done this, and with really no proof or evidence, the police left. But after being shook up about this, Mike now has to meet with this Eric Tall guy to figure out the money situation. So he meets Eric Tall at the bank, only to be told by Eric that there had been too much activity on his account within the past few days, so his funds had been frozen. They went to another bank and encountered the same scenario. Now keep in mind, Mike never heard a bank teller or a manager say this. It was only reported to him by Eric. Eric was sympathetic. This was a mess. This was unfortunate. But hey, call me in a couple of days. This whole bank freezing thing will be taken care of, and we'll get you another check. Easy peasy. Mike Dippolito would never see or hear from Eric Tall again. If that was his real name. I don't think it was. So what happened to Mike is called the Spanish prisoner con. It's a confidence trick originating in the late 19th century. The trickster tells his victim that he's corresponding with a wealthy person who's been imprisoned in Spain under a false identity. The prisoner cannot reveal who he really is without serious repercussions, and he's relying on his friend to raise money and help him get released. So his friend is the person who's tricking the victim. The trickster offers to allow the mark or the victim to put up some of the capital, promising even more money when the prisoner is released, because this is like royalty, you know, this royal person is going to be so grateful for your help that they're just going to lavish you with wealth. There's also usually a non-monetary benefit for the mark, such as the hand of a beautiful woman, the prisoner's daughter, for instance. So after the mark gives up the money, he's informed that further complications have arisen, more money is needed, and this continues until the mark has no more money or refuses to give up anymore. Now, there's always an emphasis on secrecy, right? The trickster, the guy who's doing the scam, he's showing trust in the victim, the mark, to be discreet. I've chosen you based on, your high moral standard and your good soul and your good heart and the fact that you're trustworthy. You have a good reputation. So the mark's feeling special, like they have been chosen because of what a good person they are to help this royal king or queen or prince or whatever get out of prison, and their life's going to be made after this, right? So it also might sound familiar to the good old Nigerian prince scam, which has been relieving people of their money for years and is still going strong. CNBC reports that this scam still rakes in over $700,000 a year. So you receive an email by someone overseas who claims to be royalty. They have this fortune, but they can't get it out of the country. So they ask if they can send it to your bank account for safekeeping, and then in return, they'll give you some of their large fortune. So they take your bank account info, and they definitely don't put any money in your bank account. They just take all of your money out of the bank account. So now Mike is literally, he's out of money, right? He's still on probation, and he knows, deep down inside that Dalia is the reason for all of it. He goes over in his head all the people who told him that she was bad news. Everyone, basically. He'd even lost 2 close friends over his marriage to her. And as the days went by and Eric ghosted him, Mike confronts Dalia. But surprise, she has happy news, a happy distraction. She tells Mike she's pregnant, she's with child. He's going to be a father. With the promise of parenthood, the hope of new life, Mike completely forgets, for the time being, that she basically stole $200,000 from him. They begin to prepare for the arrival of their baby. Dalia is always reading baby books and complaining about getting fat. They talked about baby names. Dalia takes all her prenatal vitamins and goes to her doctor's appointments, even though they always seem to get canceled at the last minute when Mike plans to go to her doctor's appointment with her. And Dalia and Mike also started going to marriage counseling so they could get past their trust issues and ensure that they have a strong foundation when the baby arrives. In therapy, Dalia told Mike that she needed him to put the money thing behind them. The money thing, $200,000 is gone. Put it behind you. She felt that it was holding them back. And he tried to tell her it wasn't really something to get past because he physically needed that money and it was gone. But every time he tried to get a straight answer out of her, she shut down. All right, so May arrives. Spring was in the air. Dalia's pregnant, she's, glowing with this new life growing inside of her. And then Dalia told Mike that she'd gotten a call from a detective at the Boynton Beach Police Department, a detective named Detective Harlowe. Now, Dalia claims that this detective called to say that Mike was in some sort of danger. So she shows him the number right on the caller ID. And when they called it back, it did in fact reach the Boynton Beach Police Department, but they were informed that no one named Detective Harlowe worked there. On May 27th, Mike and Dalia went to the gym together, which was out of character for her since she had become pregnant with child. She didn't really like to go to the gym that much, and she usually liked to go alone. But when Mike was getting ready for his workout in the morning, she surprised him. She said she wanted to go with him, and he was pleased. After their workout, they left the gym and they walked to the car. But there was a piece of paper taped to the windshield. It was an extortion letter. It told Mike to bring $40,000 back to the same parking spot at 9:30 a.m. the next day and to place it under the car behind him. This letter warned him not to tell anyone, especially his wife. It ended with the words, "I will tell you that all that is happening to you has happened to you." And is what will happen on Friday. Tell no one, come alone, signed someone who can help you. This is the most convoluted extortion letter since John Benet Ramsey, right? All that has happened to you is happening to you and will happen. It's like Yoda wrote this letter. There was a number on the extortion letter, and it was a Miami Beach area code. And even though the letter said not to tell anyone, Dalia insisted that they needed to call the police, and they fill out a police report. In my opinion, at this point, what I feel, allegedly, Dalia is building a paper trail. And you'll see what I mean in a little while. She wants there to be a record of the fact that Mike has had problems with the law, and maybe there was someone or multiple someones out there who had something to gain from messing with Mike. And poor Mike at this point, he's living in the Matrix. He has no idea what's going on, and his life is just falling down around him. Dalia also thought it would be a good idea to call the number that was written on the extortion note. Of course, Dalia was the one to call, not Mike, and she claimed that a woman answered and informed her that if they didn't pay up, both she and Mike would be killed. Mike and Dalia even drove to the place at the time where they were supposed to leave the money. They didn't leave the money, but they kind of sat a little ways away and watched, and nobody showed up. Nothing happened. Now, Dalia claimed to be terrified by this, right? She was terrified. She's got a life inside her she has to protect. And she suggested that they get a guard dog, but they already had 2 dogs, and they had a pretty good surveillance system. They had cameras and motion detectors, so they didn't pursue that any further. But they worked together as a team, Dalia and Mike, trying to figure out who might be doing this to them. Basically, This was just Dalia bringing up random people in Mike's life, speculating out loud if this person or that person could be responsible. She wondered out loud if it could be Mike's prior business partners, the ones who'd stayed in prison while Mike took a deal and got a lighter sentence. And Mike was obviously aware that some of the companies he'd worked for had connections and ties to organized crime, so it wasn't a huge leap for him to make, but why now? Why after 6 years? Why after, peace and quiet for that long would they start popping up in his life now? Dalia even suggested that it might be his ex-wife, Maria, who she claimed was resentful, bitter, and jealous because Mike left her for Dalia. So Mike called Maria and asked her if she was the one trying to set him up. And you can imagine how that conversation went. But the things that his innocent little wife was telling him, they didn't sound as crazy or out there to him as they do to us. So imagine you're Mike, right? You're living your life as normally as possible. Sure, you had a rough past. You did some things you weren't proud of, but you were trying to move past that and walk the straight and narrow. All of a sudden, years later, strange things start happening to you. The police keep showing up at your house at random places throughout the city, wanting to search your property, your person, your vehicle, because someone's been calling in anonymous tips on you, saying that you have drugs, you sell drugs, you take drugs, but you know you don't have drugs. But then you find drugs in your gas tank, and the cops find them behind the spare tire on your SUV. You clearly know someone's trying to set you up. Someone's messing with you, but you don't know who. And as far as you're concerned, your wife, who's suffering through all of this with you, she's the only person you can trust. Mike became extremely paranoid. He searched his house every time he came home. He searched his gym bag every time he went to the gym, and he searched his car every time he got into it. His life was a living hell. He told the police officer who interviewed him about that extortion note left on his car, "I wish whoever this is would just break my windows or even just shoot me and get it over with already." He was always looking over his shoulder and finding solace in his wife, who seemed as outraged and confused as he was. But the truth was, she wasn't confused. The only reason she was outraged was because her many plans to have her husband thrown back into jail had failed. Dalia Dippolito was behind all of it, and it would only get worse. Once she figured out that getting Mike locked up again wasn't going to work, she turned to darker solutions. On July 22nd, Mike had a liposuction on his back to eliminate his love handles, and his recovery was a hard one. He was on bed rest for 2 weeks due to the pain, and to add to it, he was constantly running to the bathroom because he had some stomach issues. He thought that he was having stomach issues from a case of food poisoning. But the inside of his mouth was also covered in ulcers, and he even talked to his plastic surgeon to see if something had been done during the surgery to have caused these issues, like maybe a medication or something that he'd been given, but the surgeon was like, no, there's nothing. His stomach sickness and mouth ulcers most likely had more to do with the iced chai latte tea from Starbucks that was laced with antifreeze that his thoughtful wife had brought him when he was laid up in bed. She'd dumped out half the drink and filled it up with odorless, colorless antifreeze. She'd become so desperate with her well-laid plans to get Mike in cuffs, proving to all be unsuccessful. It was no longer her mission to get him arrested. She now wanted him dead. And there was another reason that her plans had changed to murder. Right around this time, Dalia told Mike she had a judge friend in Miami who'd given her the name of a lawyer, and Mike needed a new lawyer, didn't he? Dalia told Mike this Miami lawyer would allow Mike to handle everything via mail. It's called administrative probation. According to the law offices of Liefert and Liefert, located in Palm Beach and Broward County, Florida, administrative probation is a form of non-contact supervision in which an offender who presents a low risk of harm to the community may be transferred by the Department of Corrections to a non-reporting status until the expiration of the probation. Now, this would only be considered after the term's been completed halfway successfully. I don't know why Mike just didn't Google it. There was no judge, no lawyer, no possibility of administrative probation. It was another Dalia Dippolito special. Dalia told Mike she'd already paid his retainer, and now Mike should just wait for the call, which came the next day from a man who called himself Richard. Richard told Mike he should write a letter to the judge of why he was seeking administrative probation and then bring it to the Miami courthouse the next day, where a paralegal would be waiting to grab it from him. Dalia wrote the letter for him. They drove out there together, and they gave the letter to a waiting paralegal, as planned. Richard called to follow up, and he was like, everything's looking good. This is going to be so easy. We're going to have you on this administrative probation before you know it. The only problem is your house, man. Your house, because of the restitution. your house might be a target. They might try to seize it to pay off the restitution to the people you've wronged. Is there anybody else's name you can transfer it into? Like anybody, Of course there was. Mike's loyal, loving wife, Dalia. The next day, Mike and Dalia drove to Delray Beach and paid $100 to transfer the title of Mike's house into Dalia's name. However, the guy who was assisting them with this switch, he innocently questioned what they hoped to gain from this, considering they were married. And in Florida, if you're married, it's community property, right? That means the house was community property, which meant they just paid $100 and driven to Delray Beach for nothing, really. If Mike's house was under threat of being seized, it still would be if it was under Dalia's name because it's community property. Okay, so now we need to break off here and talk about another man that's important to this story. His name was Mohammed Shahade, and he was a 32-year-old who was born in Jerusalem and moved to the United States when he was 1. He'd been spotted by a television producer while at a nightclub in Miami, and he'd been given a spot, a part on the show Burn Notice, playing a terrorist, which is absolutely terrible. Did they just send this television producer out to nightclubs and they were like, find someone who looks like a terrorist, and he picked Mohammed? When Mohammed met Dalia, he was the owner of several check-cashing convenience stores in South Florida, and she had walked into his Boca Raton location while he was there. She was 18 years old, gorgeous, of course, always dressed to the nines, and she told him she was getting her car washed at the nearby Mobil station, but she came in and out of the store multiple times in a 10-minute period to flirt with him. So that night, they hooked up, and from then on, they saw each other a few times a week. When asked to describe their relationship, Mohammed said they were intimate friends. I think that means friends with benefits. Just as Mike Dippolito quickly figured out Dalia's "not like other girls, don't you wish your girlfriend was hot like me" routine was an act, Mohammed figured out much of the same. He said that she could become really bratty and throw fits if she didn't get her way, and he found her to be very insincere and two-faced, very concerned with shallow things like looks and money, but not much else. He had been talked into marrying a woman. His family had chosen for him an arranged marriage, and Dalia wasn't happy with it. She berated him. She basically said he was weak and stupid for letting his family make these choices for him. And when that didn't change his mind, she showed up at his apartment on a night she knew his new bride was going to be there, and then she refused to leave. At this point, Mohammed realizes this girl's unhinged. She's a little crazy, a little dangerous, and he placed some boundaries on their relationship. He did, however, continue to see her in secret, even after his marriage in May of 2003. So he didn't place many boundaries, right? In my opinion. Now, in 2004, he and his wife, who he had the arranged marriage with, they got divorced, and his relationship with Dalia increased in intensity. But then she left for California, and he claims he didn't see her for the better part of 4 years. That is, until she called him randomly, saying she was in town, she was in Florida, and she wanted to get together for drinks. Now, this would have been right around the time she met Mike Dippolito for the first time, and it's theorized she arranged this meeting with Mohammed the same weekend that she was in Florida that she'd met Mike. So they met for drinks in West Palm Beach, and she bragged to him about her architect boyfriend from New York. She was engaged to him. She showed off her $40,000 diamond ring, and she gushed about how happy she was. Now, this person she's talking about is not Mike, right? It's a different guy. Most likely, I think, Mike Stanley she's talking about. But she also chatted with Mohammed a little bit about her massage parlors in California, and then they parted ways after promising to keep in touch. Months later, Mohammed ran into Dalia again at a restaurant in Palm Beach Gardens, but this time, Dalia wasn't glowing with happiness. She seemed down and distracted, according to Mohammed. She told him she was trapped in an unhappy marriage with a violent, abusive man who was on probation, sold drugs, and had a steroid habit. When Mohammed asked her why she didn't just leave, she told him her husband was insanely jealous and possessive. She was afraid for her life. Now, according to Mohammed, she didn't have any bruises or any outward signs of abuse that he could see, but she did seem genuinely scared and asked for his help. The next morning, she showed up at his house around 6 a.m. Now, our buddy Mohammed, he's got a little bit of a Xanax habit. And according to him, this was 6:30 in the morning. It's early. He was half asleep and he's out of it from all the Xanax that he took. So he doesn't remember exactly what happened, but he thinks that something physical happened between them. Think Monica Lewinsky and Bill Clinton. Now, this would have been right after the Ritz-Carlton incident in Manalapan. While she was there with Mohammed that morning, she asked him for some Xanax and he gave it to her. Now, according to Muhammad, Dalia fessed up to trying to frame Mike and get him thrown back in jail. She said there had even been a third attempt where she'd set him up and she'd had a friend of hers call in a tip to the police. But when the police got to Mike's location, he'd already left, so they missed him. She knew that Muhammad had some connections in the West Palm Beach Police Department, and she asked him to put her in touch with someone there who could help her. He did get her in contact with an Officer Wilson of the Palm Beach Police Department, and she spoke with Wilson on March 18th. So, as you can see, we've gone back in time a little. So for some perspective, let's connect the dots. Dalia sees Muhammad at the club the night of the 15th, and now this is the night they get back from Manalapan and the Ritz-Carlton. She goes to his house at 6 a.m. the next morning, does something physical with him, allegedly, and he gives her a Xanax, allegedly. Later that day, when Mike Dippolito goes to his AA meeting, he stops to get gas and finds pills and powders in his car, hidden in the gas tank. A few days later, Dalia meets with this detective, Wilson, and this is right around the time when Dalia is telling Mike that she's wired the money to his lawyer to pay his restitution, but it hasn't gotten there, and his lawyer tells him he doesn't think the money's ever coming. So March 18th, Dalia meets with the detective, tells this guy that her husband is abusive, uses steroids, sells drugs, the whole spiel, and she could promise him that if he stops Mike, there will be drugs on him. But then she offers to pay the detective, and he tells her, no, this is my job, this is what I do. Serve and protect, keeping people safe. But she continues offering to pay him, which made him feel obviously very uncomfortable, and he breaks off contact with her, right? He's like, yeah, maybe I'll find someone in your jurisdiction, I can't help you. So also in March, Muhammad asks Dalia to co-sign for a car he wants to buy because his credit isn't great. But instead of doing that, Dalia decides she's going to use the money she just stole from her husband and buy this man a Range Rover. Cash. She's a girl after Jake Paul's heart. Dalia Dippolito and Jake Paul would have been perfect together. Muhammad said that it was technically their car that they could both use, but Dalia had a Mercedes and she also had Mike's SUV at her disposal, which she often drove. So really, it was technically Muhammad's to use. When he asked her where she got the money from, she said it was from the restitution money she was supposed to be holding for Mike, but she'd already spent half of it on new clothes, hair extensions, and tanning, and plus a Range Rover for the dude you used to have sex with. She claimed the other half was hidden somewhere and requested Muhammad's help in setting up a fake bank account. She also wanted to know if he could help her and forge a fake wire transfer receipt. Because remember, at this time she's trying to convince Mike she's actually wired the money, which she never did. Okay, so the weeks are passing. Dalia is getting more desperate. Her efforts to get Mike arrested have failed. He's onto her about the missing money and demanding an explanation. Suddenly, she's pregnant, which has bought her some time, but she's running out of tricks. At the end of March, she called Muhammad and she said she needed to meet with him desperately. He was like, okay, come to my cousin's store. It's a clothing shop called Urban Wear in Riviera Beach. And she showed up driving her Mercedes with her long hair flowing, wearing a short skirt and no bra. And of course, there's some guys standing outside the shop. They catcalled her, they commented on her appearance, and she breezed past, loving the attention. But she had a job to do. She was there to enlist Muhammad's help in a very important mission. She told Muhammad and his cousin, the store owner, the situation was out of control with Mike. She could see no way out. She needed someone to kill her husband. According to Muhammad, he said no. This was crazy, but she kept insisting. Her voice is getting louder and louder until the guys who'd been standing outside when she arrived, who were now inside, they heard her. But these weren't just regular guys shopping for some cool clothes. These men happened to be a part of a group called the Buck Wild Gang. The corner the store was on was their corner, and they used Urban Wear as a hangout. The Buck Wild Gang was known for drug dealing, robbery, extortion, and even murder, having been linked to some 24 shootings. So they hear her demanding that someone kill her husband, and they're like, we can kill your husband. Muhammad and his cousin allegedly warned Dalia that these guys were serious, not to be messed with. They were like, if you enlist these guys' help, there's no going back. But she went outside with these gang members anyways to converse on the street, which seems to be a good idea. It's way more private than inside the store. Anyways, one of the guys was named Larry Coe, and he was a longtime gang member. He proceeded to negotiate with her, and they kind of settled on, payment and what she wanted him to do, and she gave him all this information. So he and Dalia get into his car to drive and check out Mike's apartment, because that's where she wanted it to happen, her husband to be killed, and this way they could plan the best way to do it and when. And Muhammad and his cousin just see this girl get in the car with these gang members, and they're like, oh, Dalia's not coming back. R.I.P. Dalia, she's done. But Dalia and the gang members, they did get back. And when they got back, Larry Coe took Muhammad aside And he was like, this chick's crazy. This apartment, this townhouse, has motion detectors, alarms on the front and back door, cameras everywhere. Like, it's impossible. It can't be done. But Larry Coe also told Muhammad that not only had Dalia given them Mike's address and schedules, but she'd offered to pay them or give them Muhammad's Range Rover, whichever they preferred. You know, she left it up to them. However, Larry Coe was like, no, we're out. We can't do it. Your Range Rover's safe for now. So the Buck Wild gang, they were upfront with Dalia. They told her they weren't doing it. It was too risky, but this didn't compute for her. See, Dalia had always gone through life getting her way, especially when it came to men. She used whatever was at her disposal, usually her looks and sex, in order to gain something, to have others do her dirty work. So when they told her no, she thought maybe they were just like playing hard to get, maybe they wanted more money. She somehow was able to get Larry Coe's cell phone number and proceeded to barrage him with phone calls, all of which went unanswered. You know you're an unstable and scary person when a group of guys called the Buck Wild Gang want to avoid you and are scared of you. So she made 12 calls to Larry Coe's cell phone on April 2nd. Remember that this was the day Mike had met with Eric Tall at the bank and tried to get another check, but Eric said that the funds were frozen and he'd have to wait a couple of days before he could get another check to him. And once again, Dalia knows that Eric Tall's never going to give him this check, right? She knows she's running out of time. The same day she's calling the gang member to kill her husband, the police also show up for a domestic dispute at the Dippolitos. So Muhammad claims that he left the country and he didn't come back until late June, and Dalia was even worse. She was in a more frantic state than ever, sometimes calling him 10 times a day. Dalia told Muhammad that Mike was getting suspicious, and she'd lied to him about being pregnant, even lying to her own mother to make it more believable. But she was panicking, right? Because they were supposed to go to a baseball game where one of Mike's coworkers and his pregnant wife would also be. Now, Mike had gone all out for this baseball game. He invited Dalia's entire family. He shelled out big bucks for a luxury box for all of them. But she was concerned that his friend's wife, who was allegedly 4 months pregnant, and Dalia, who said she was allegedly 4 months pregnant, like they would look different pregnant-wise. And this might set off some alarm bells in Mike's head when he saw that his friend's wife looked pregnant, but Dalia didn't. The game was supposed to happen on July 19th, and she asked Muhammad to go along for emotional support, but he said no. She also asked him to buy her a gun off the street, and again, he said no. And I don't know what world this girl lives in. You're going to a baseball game with your family and your husband, and you're going to ask some random guy that you used to sleep with to come along as well, like a buffer, because that's going to make it less awkward? I don't know. Okay, so July 21st, Mike has the house moved into Dalia's name, but then she also discovers that it doesn't really mean anything, not while Mike is alive, at least. So she calls Muhammad and she says they need to meet again. They meet in the parking lot of a mobile station that was close to her house, and they sat in Muhammad's car, a new Lexus. He actually sold the Range Rover before he left for his vacation because he was scared that Larry Coe would try to take it from him as payment for something. So Dalia directly tells Muhammad in his car during this meeting that he needs to help her find someone to kill her husband. And he tries to talk her out of it, but eventually he gets sick of trying to do that, and he leaves her in his car to go into the gas station to buy a pack of cigarettes. When he got back in the car, Dalia told him, "Oh, I have to get something out of my car. I'll be right back." And she took her purse and got out of his car. And when he's waiting for her to get back, he opens up his glove compartment to put his wallet back in and sees that something is missing. While he was in the gas station, Dalia had taken his gun out of his glove compartment, taken the gun that he had in his glove compartment. She took it and she stole it, right? So when she got back, he told her, like, give it back to me. Don't try that again. He told her she was an idiot for even touching a gun like that with no gloves because she didn't know if it had been involved in a crime. Good advice. It's really good advice. But honestly, his real concern is not about Dalia being framed for a crime, right? After he left the mobile gas station, he considered what a dangerous person she could truly be to him. Why had she stolen his gun? He knew she wanted to kill her husband, and perhaps there was enough of a paper trail between Dalia and Muhammad, given all the calls, texts, and the gift of a $40,000 car to tie him to her and to the murder, if there was one. Maybe she was trying to set him up. Additionally, the fact that she was serious enough about killing her husband worried him. He'd been trying to talk her out of it for months, but she was still dead set. So he called his lawyer, who recommended that he go to the police, which is exactly what he did. Now, Muhammad signed a confidential informant agreement. He said he didn't want Dalia to get into trouble, but he couldn't in good conscience do nothing when he knew this man's life was in danger. Now, to his credit, although I do think that a lot of it was selfish, like worried about being involved with her, worried about possibly being framed for Mike's murder, most criminal informants are paid somehow. They're compensated somehow. And Muhammad was not compensated at all, but he also wanted his identity kept private, right? Of course he did. He didn't want Dalia to know he'd been the one to turn on her, and he couldn't have it get out in the streets that he was a snitch. He didn't realize, however, that the contract he signed stated if the case went to court, he'd be required to testify. He also didn't realize that signing that paper had given police permission to install a monitoring device in his vehicle on his person, and this monitoring device would record video and audio. Now, in part 2, we're going to see with our own eyes how Dalia could cold-heartedly plan the murder of a man she claimed to love, a man who she had lied to and stolen from since the day she met him. We're also going to see the way the Boynton Beach police set her up to get all of that on tape, an action that would come under fire later on. And we're also going to watch Dalia try to gaslight the shit out of everyone, unsuccessfully, granted, but to witness it is something really special. We'll see all the shenanigans she gets into through her multiple trials. That's right, multiple trials. This is Dalia Dippolito we're talking about, okay? She's the queen of extra. One trial will simply not do. Okay, before we go, I want to give some Patreon birthday shout-outs because I am an idiot and I forgot to do January and February. And when this posts, it'll probably be March. So I'm way behind. But we're going to catch up because my Patreons are the bomb and they deserve a million birthday wishes. All right, so I've got Morgan Spinks, and Morgan turned 25 on January 25th. Congratulations, Morgan. I also have Alexa Wilkinson, who turned 21 on January 8th. And we have Carissa Irwi, who turned 30 on the 2nd of January. Oh, it's right around Bella's birthday. Name pronounced Carissa, ignore the H. Did I say Charissa? I think I said Carissa, right? I think I said it right. Susan Tursick, who's been a really loyal Patreon and a subscriber of mine for a while, her brother's birthday was January 26th. And this is special to her because her brother was really close to her, and he passed away before she had her son, and she really thinks that her brother would have been an amazing uncle to her son, Ben. So happy birthday to Susan's brother. Wherever he is, I'm sure he's super proud of you and super proud of Ben. Emma Ball turned 39 on the 10th of January. Her grandmother's birthday was also the 10th of January, and she misses her loads and was honored to share her birthday with her. My grandmother's birthday on my mother's side is also in January, so it is a very special month. Sarah Duffy says she's going to be 51 on the 23rd. That's awesome. Denise Mom turned 62 on the 25th of January. Rachel Dominy turned 24 on the 11th of January. Marnie Causey's birthday was on January 15th. She turned 55. Rachel Thorne's birthday was January 26th, and she can't believe she's going to be 49, or she turned 49. It was scary to her. Oh, man, the time flies. I feel you. I turned 36 in February, and I was like, am I 36? Am I 34? Pretty sure I was 34. Like, I just forgotten the last 2 years existed. Jessica Hathaway's birthday was January 10th, and she turned 44. Karen Purnell's daughter, Abigail, turned 11 on January 22nd. Happy birthday, Abigail. I know it's late. I know I'm so late. I'm a horrible person. I'm a horrible Aunt Stephanie. But even though it's late, happy birthday to you, you beautiful little girl, Abigail. What a cute name and what a good age. 11's a great age. You're like just old enough where people don't put you at the kids' table, but you're still young enough where your parents do everything for you. It's pretty awesome. Jocelyn Ford turned 45 on January 23rd. Penny's birthday was January 18th, and Leah said that her 8-year anniversary with her boyfriend is on the 17th of January. So, I mean, that's like 8 years is a long time. Are you gonna get that ring soon? If he likes it, then he needs to put a ring on it. Carrie Matthews says that she turned 34 on the 6th of January, and Amy Hill says that her birthday was on January 12th, the big 30. Congratulations. That's like when you have the over the hill birthday parties. Isn't that when they do that? Isn't that 30 now? It's so ridiculous. 30 is the new 20. And Tamara Dillon says that her Ryan, I assume it's her son, turned 6 on the 4th of January. And Bella, my my birthday. My daughter Bella's birthday is the 3rd of January. She turned 3. What a great time. And then Teresa Carter says she turned 45 on the 21st of January. So happy birthday to all my Patreons. Happy birthday to all of you out there who had a birthday in January, February, March. I'm going to do the February birthday shout outs in another video. But thank you guys so much. If you guys want to join Patreon, I do what I can. Most of the time you'll get early access to videos, and I post, a couple of times a week to let you know what's going on, what cases I'm working on. You get to vote on cases. There's always a link in the description box if you want to check that out. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for listening to the sponsor. Thank you for watching my videos and supporting me. I love you so very much. Stay kind and stay beautiful, and I'll see you in part 2. Bye.